All right, we're live. Mike and Casey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. And I think we're going to start by asking Kevin Burnham, the project manager from the Connecticut DOT, to give a brief introduction. And then I'll be speaking. My name is Casey Harden. I'm the project manager for AECOM. And then Mike Morehouse will follow me in the presentation. He's one of the principal planners in the project from FHI Studio. So Kevin, maybe you just give a quick introduction.
Great. Thanks, Casey. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. The project team is going to go over, we've been doing a lot of work over the past months and want to talk about the alternatives that we've been looking at and what the project was looking forward to do moving forward. And so I won't delay any further. Let the project team give you all the info on this study. Thanks.
Thanks, Kevin. And we have a very quick presentation, and our intent here is to kind of just refresh you all on what's going on with this project so that we can inform a back and forth discussion for the majority of this kind of lunch hour. And again, we turn this a listening session. Our purpose here is to listen to you rather than preach to you. So just to kind of give you a heads up, this is now the third one of these listening sessions we've conducted with Transport Hartford. And again, thanks to Thomas for coordinating on this. And, we really value the work you guys do in advocating for the elements and types of transportation that you do. So, applause there. We are kind of well into what we call phase 2 of our study. We've published quite a bit of work at the conclusion of phase 1 towards the end of last year. And since then, we have been analyzing the over 100 different transportation alternatives that came out of phase 1. Right now, we are going through a process that is screening many of them and identifying specific alternatives that score well to be included in a variety of different programs that we're going to test and model in different ways as we establish an implementation plan over the later course this year. In some of the slides that follow, we're going to explain a lot more what these somewhat esoteric processes actually include. You can go to the next slide, Mike. So last time we talked to you, we had finished the top sieve in this screening diagram, high-level fatal flaw analysis, and it was very high level. Essentially, we had gotten many ideas from the public that we'd seen in previous studies, and that we'd come up with ourselves. And we set a pretty low bar to kind of merit the what we term detailed evaluations. So that's what we're concluding right now. So we've gone through a whole host of these, again, 100+ alternatives. We put them up on the website, incorporating feedback, and are doing a technical evaluation based on their mobility and transportation merits, their environmental sustainability and resiliency effects, and a whole host of kind of other criteria that we've identified and we can walk you through. But to start with that, Mike is going to summarize the feedback that we've gotten. We've now had the collaboration portal open for 5 or 6 months. And the feedback that we've gotten from the public has been a key part of that process.
Great, thanks, Casey. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just go over some of what we've been doing and what we've been hearing before we talk a little bit about our process and how we use community engagement to shape the outcomes of our study. As Casey said, we've been doing online conversations with you folks and many other stakeholders over the past year and a half. So that's allowed us to collect a lot of very specific feedback on our transportation concepts, which we're very grateful for. But we've been doing a lot of other things over the past few months that I think really added a lot of energy and excitement to the project. We've been using local gift card giveaways to help drive people to our engagement platforms, whether that be social media or our web presence. And we've been participating with you all on the multimodal meetups, which have been really great. And we value the conversation that's had at those. And we continue to talk with many stakeholders across the entire spectrum of the greater Hartford area. The one thing that has been kind of new to the process is we teamed up with another firm called Voices of Women of Color based in Hartford. They've really amplified our messaging to the specific neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods where we've been having somewhat of a difficulty getting our message out. Neighborhoods of color, those with limited English proficiency and so on. They've actually hosted they're not really focus groups, but they call them house parties, but what they amount to are sort of focused neighborhood meetings where people come in to their homes, have a bit of a social engagement, and then specifically talk about the project and fill out forms on where their interests are with regard to some of the transportation concepts we've developed. So that's kind of concluded, and we've gotten hundreds of really positive and instructive comments as a result of those meetings. And now we've sort of moved our engagement into the pop-up season. We're at lots of different festivals recently, at the Taste Festival, Latino Fest Domingo. Voices is also helping us out at the Jazz Fest and the Elizabeth Park concert series, and a number of other things that will start to span to late summer, early fall. So you'll see us around, and I think we're really adding to the engagement by being out in the public. So what we've done is we've gone through a year and a half of feedback from a variety of different things that we've been doing, the website, of course, being one, but also from the house party engagements, the stakeholder interviews we've been holding, and a variety of other social media engagements that we've been conducting. And we've organized just about everything we've heard, which are thousands of comments, into a series of themes. And I'm not going to go through all these in particular, but the graph that you see here is sort of a ranking of the general sentiments that we're getting for various themes. So how many people are liking or mentioning certain types of needs for us to take into account. I highlighted a few in green because I think these resonate really strongly with Transport Hartford. Obviously, we know pedestrian and bicyclist safety is a very, very high priority, and I know you're going to be at Bushnell Park to discuss this in greater detail. That has come out, above, right on the top of concerns from the community. And I think any plan that moves forward, any program definitely has to really address bicycle pedestrian safety in a very, very strong, deliberate way. So we're thrilled to see that as a top priority. But there's also a lot of feedback related to reducing car dependency, reducing carbon emissions, improving mobility for those who don't own automobiles, and building solutions around climate resiliency. So environmental and safety is heavily woven throughout all of the feedback we've received. And just whether it's our stakeholders or the general public or our technical task leaders on the project team, we all are sort of coming to the same conclusion that local transportation really matters and plays a big part in the overall program that the department's going to embark on. So if I could just generally summarize what we've heard and some of those top tier of comments, it's really connecting local destinations with safe, equitable, and environmentally friendly transportation, particularly non-motorized mobility that offers options for all people. Another strong theme is really supporting the economy and quality of life. And that means, making sure that people can get to local businesses and employment, and there's a strong connection with the Connecticut River, as well as across the Connecticut River. We've heard a strong desire for more local connections to bring people across the Connecticut River. There's also a lot of interest in investing in transit, but transit that, spans, higher frequencies, spans hours of service later into the evening and on weekends, just making it generally more easy to use, more accessible, and more reliable. And we still have, because this is a regional study and there are people who commute in and through the greater Hartford area and through the core, that highway congestion is something that should be addressed, particularly with regard to safety and outdated geometrics. There seems to be strong sentiment that new capacity isn't the solution that people are looking for, but with realignment and untangling some of the complicated geometry that's out there today, we can open up some bottlenecks and get things flowing more smoothly. So that is also a theme that we've been hearing consistently. So what do we do with all of that information? And this is where we get a little bit into the process, and I promise this is the last slide, but give me a second to explain where we are. Casey talked about the universe of alternatives over here on the left. What we've done is we've gathered over 100 different alternatives, and that was largely based from feedback from the communities, stakeholders, and our technical analysis. And we're separating those into competing alternatives and complementary alternatives. So competing alternatives might be things that satisfy a similar need, occupy a similar corridor, or solve an additional need, but just in a different way. So obviously, we're not going to construct or move forward with over 100 ideas. We want to make sure we're picking the ones that are most technically feasible, cost effective, and so on. So those are going through an evaluation process now. There's also the complementary alternatives. Those are alternatives that work together, that synergistically improve one another because they're combined in a way that makes sense. For example, transit and last mile bicycle pedestrian connectivity. Those are complementary because they both serve to strengthen one another by doing them together. And so we're at that process now where we're really sorting that out, and we're about to build these programs. You'll see again on the left side of the screen, that multicolored box. There's a series of programs that will involve very short-term needs, things that we think we can do relatively easily and cost effectively, that are pretty much no-brainers when you think about them. These could be a lot of transit, bike ped types of improvements. We'll build upon that program to do a second program, which will include all of the near-term stuff, plus some midterm stuff or some early phases of long-term projects. And then finally, there'll be the long-term solution, which could include some of the bigger investments that we currently don't have funding for, but we know are important to the overall network concept, regional concept that we're going for. And then we're also going to take a look at funding and financing, based on what we have, what we know we're getting, how we can potentially finance projects. There will be a little bit of a fiscal constraint applied to see what's reasonable. And as you all know, funding changes. Administrations sometimes pass bills and move into law where we get additional infusions of cash into our transportation system, like we recently saw with the IIJA. And that there could be more of that in the future, and there could certainly be other things that bring more money into our transportation coffers. But we're going to do our best to try to understand what we can reasonably expect in the long term, and do a program that's constrained based on that. So once our programs are defined, we're going through a modeling process that looks at future scenarios, because we want to make sure whatever investments we make, especially at the longer term ones, work well, not only today, but work well into the future. And so there's a very robust scenario planning model that's been developed specifically for this project that's going to take a look at how things might work if the status quo doesn't continue out into the future. So what happens if some of the behavior changes that we've seen based on the pandemic, where fewer people are commuting into office environments during the peak hours of the day? What happens if that stays and continues in the future? Or if there's another pandemic or other sort of climate related issues that cause people to work on a more as needed basis, or from a home-based model, what does that do to the viability of some of these longer term investments? Or what if technology continues to disrupt the transportation sector and we have a different way of thinking about how we move around? That's something we'll take a look at. We know electric vehicles are starting to really get some market share. We know autonomous vehicle technologies in the future, alternative technology ways of delivering freight. So there's a lot of things that could potentially, and mobility as a service, which is something I think you're all familiar with as well. How do we make using technology, mobility much easier and seamless to use for people? Land use could also change. We know that prior to the pandemic, there was a migration of a lot of people moving back into cities, and that slowed somewhat, and some could argue maybe even reversed recently. But we want to take a look at different land use scenarios, even with transit-oriented development being really hot right now. What happens with densification around rail assets, infilling of corridors? How does that affect how we plan our transportation system? And then, of course, there could be many policies that also we have to think about, whether that's congestion pricing policies, policies around social equity or environmental mitigation. These are all things that could influence how funding is directed to transportation and how we actually build out our future system. And so we want to start the conversation about thinking about what future scenarios might be realistic to test. And so we're at that phase now. But as you know, that's our technical process. As a project team, we can't make decisions. The decisions are going to rest with major stakeholders, major public agencies, the federal government, of course. And so they're going to take this information, look at it, and the outcomes will be a series of different actions. The early actions that I spoke about, the program one stuff that we think are very critical to getting things off the ground. Some intermediate projects, which will need more engineering, but still could be done in a relatively short period of time. And then the longer term projects, which will require more extensive environmental study, obviously funding, and there's a lot of what we call circuit breakers, things that could happen in the scenario planning that could cause us to branch one way or another. So we want to make sure the plan has some of those circuit breakers built in so that if something happens that we aren't expecting, we can, the department can pivot and potentially pursue another avenue. So I know that's a lot. It's a complicated process and a lot to really wrestle with as a project team, but this is how we're incorporating feedback and thinking about, what makes the most sense for the future. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Casey, Kevin, to moderate the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. As always, stay involved. This is where you can reach us, and we're always happy to have continued conversations about these topics. Here, Casey.
Great. So thank you so much, Mike and Casey, for this presentation. Casey, you have anything to add? Or
no, I was gonna kick it back to you, then I realized
okay.
I was on mute. So
yeah, no worries. So here we go. Questions for the Greater Hartford Mobility Study team is now. If not, I have some questions. All right, Remy, I can start with a question from me. We are in an interesting time now because, since the beginning of the year, we have fare-free bus rides. And for anybody who has been taking the bus recently, it's working better. The buses are much more reliable. The loading time is shorter. And I think many see the benefits of having a fare-free bus environment, and so we as advocates we are thinking of pushing for making that a bit more secure and permanent. But in your modeling process that you're working on, do you integrate the fare-free bus ride element and how it has somehow transformed transit in the Greater Hartford region?
Yeah, we have, based on kind of public feedback and thoughts of our own, we've included sort of a permanent conversion of transit to fare-free as an alternative that we're studying. And that, so that's something that we're looking at on its own and its own merits. But I definitely understand your point about reliability and speed when boarding. And so we also have an alternative that looks at a fare simplification and fare collection unification process that would simplify that process across all types of transit, bike share, and rail, with the aim to again simplify boarding and improve reliability and timing. The only catch to that is, if you still kind of have to be able to provide cash, given that I think a lot of folks, the folks who tend not to have access to bank accounts where they could load money onto a prepaid card or something tend to be from demographics that we need to provide access So, but we are definitely studying the extension or the permanence of fare free, and we understand the reliability challenges that deterrent payment provides, and so we're looking for that as an opportunity to improve reliability.
And Casey, I think Thomas's one of his questions was does the model take into consideration pricing policies, the scenario planning?
Yes, and yes, that is built into the model, that we will be able to model that alternative specifically.
Thank you, Casey. Questions for the Greater Hartford Mobilities team? You can raise your hand, or you can just unmute yourself and go. Kevin has a question in the chat. This meeting focuses on Greater Hartford alternative being considered within the Hartford or alternative anywhere in the Greater Hartford area.
Anywhere in the Greater Hartford area.
Good. I see that Mary has her hand up. Mary.
Hi. I'm apologize. I came a little late. I was walking an elderly woman down the street because I live in a walkable neighborhood in Hartford, and I know a lot of these transportation planning focuses are on the transportation planning network, kind of the metrics of how to get from a point A to point B and how to move people faster. But it seems like there's a real need in Connecticut to just say what is a walkable neighborhood. And, of course, there's safety issues, there's nature, whether there's access to nature. What is a desirable neighborhood that people don't have to be this kind of commuter culture that seems to have been the focus of transportation planning in Connecticut for maybe 100 years now, or many years, decades. So I just wonder, are you just, so I've actually have two questions. One, are you looking at just the issue of how do you make neighborhoods, maybe their transit-oriented development, more desirable as high-density clusters? And then two, how does nature factor into that issue of making our neighborhoods a desirable place to live, rather than using the transportation to sort of divide up the state, those through transportation corridors that move people from point A to point B?
It's a good question. Mike and I were. You want to take a start, Mike, and
Sure.
and I can add to it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, very thoughtful questions, because we are working for the DOT, and mobility is the mission of the Department of Transportation. However, when we set this project up, they didn't do it in the conventional way that the DOT approaches a lot of projects. They did it with a series of goals in mind, and that how does transportation influence and be influenced by these other things like environmental, quality of life, economic considerations, social equity, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of the thinking that goes into the work we're doing on the transportation front that considers a lot of those broader societal considerations. And we do know that, yeah, I mean, Connecticut has been generally focused a little heavily on just the movement of people without thinking about how that impacts sort of broader societal issues. And one of the things that we're doing is we're also building on prior work done. Now, the Capital Region Council of Governments did a regional complete streets plan. And as part of that plan, they looked at a lot of different factors that related to, density, quality of life, really where the generators are that people really want to walk and bike to, where the short trips are, where the high capacity transit stops are, and came up with a mapping tool that showed that there are areas where where people in municipalities and the state should consider a different mindset when planning transportation. So rather than, you know, everything getting applied a standard based on a design manual, it looked at context zones. And the denser those areas are, there was a recommendation to think in a modal hierarchy way, where pedestrians are the first thing that are considered, because the pedestrian is, you know, the primary mode of transportation. So the denser those areas are, the more that the pedestrian should be at the forefront of thinking and accommodation. And then it filters down to bikes, transit, you know, freight, and finally automobiles. And that's not to say that automobiles are restricted, but they need to be accommodated, but in a way where everything else is sort of prioritized. And, you know, that's a process that takes a lot of time for people to, you know, get a handle on. But, you know, we started with a lot of that information that CROG had already developed to say that, yeah, I mean, in those areas, and we've built upon that thinking with our bike ped analysis as well, to make sure that we're recommending, you know, connections and strong amenities in places that have the greatest needs. You know, and obviously we're also considering the natural built, or the natural environment in everything we do as well, so that we're not continuing to disrupt resources, but continuing to enhance things. We have a whole network of greenways that are being considered and evaluated. If you've looked at the current universal alternatives, there's a lot of things that we're trying to weave into our overall system, that they have a mobility need, but they also have a strong recreational and health related need. So
Actually, I had a related question about that, which was because greenways are often misinterpreted as a one-lane road for a paved recreational bicycle path. How do you have a biologist on? And of course, often they're like right next to the last landscape of a riparian corridor. But do you have a biologist, or you know, do you have people who are actively advocating for the value of the last landscapes in high density neighborhoods, such as in the many neighborhoods in Hartford? Because those are, you know, there is a whole different set of thinking that has highlighted the lack of nature is a serious health concern, especially in inner cities that were redlined. Yeah, and biology and health, you know, do you have somebody on your team? Because I don't think those issues were really part of the CROG study. And I keep seeing, I've lived in Hartford for 22 years now, and I just keep seeing people gravitate to neighborhoods that have a quality of life, you know, and you know, eventually the jobs and the businesses move out there, move out to those places, the restaurants and so forth. And it seems like a lot of the planning is to try to, again, kind of not dismiss those needs because they're not the economic needs, quality of life like nature, and the air temperatures. So yeah, is there a biologist or a health impact assessment?
Yeah, so our team has a range of different technical disciplines, and that includes folks who are experts in some of the heat island issues that many cities here in Connecticut face. That and while our study is mobility focused, and a lot of the specific issues that you raise associated with resiliency, you know, some of that does fall back down to the actual details of as these plans proceed towards design. And so I guess what I would commit to is that there'll certainly be a more detailed look at the specific resiliency and nature-based solutions that these specific transportation projects include as they proceed. And right now, in addition to our team on the consultant side, we are working with the Connecticut DOT's Office of Environmental Planning, which includes a whole range of different scientific disciplines, including biologists and others as well. And I did want to, you touched on some great points related to land use, and I did want to say that, and I noticed Kevin's put in a chat, you know, we have also been in an effort to address kind of what you're talking about, that synergy between land use and transportation, and understanding that, you know, we're coming at this from the mobility DOT perspective. We are partnering first with CROG's network of transportation planners or municipal planners around the study area, and that's led to some additional partnerships. And we're presenting to the Town of Newington's Planning and Zoning Committee tonight. We've held follow-on meetings with the Town of Manchester, City of Hartford, Town of East Hartford. So we are working to leverage the relationships, our relationship with the municipal planning folks that are the ones who really are in charge of that kind of land use change. But we do recognize the immense impact that transportation has.
And Casey, I see a couple other comments in the chat that sort of relate to, I think, what part of your answer, which is, you know, again, we're looking at this as a high level program. Everything that comes out of this is going to go through you know, additional planning, design, or environmental, and that's where the advocacy can play the strongest role. You know, we're not advocating for anything at this level. We're technically evaluating things, hearing feedback from the public, which all rolls forward to subsequent work. So whether it's the natural aspect, Mary, that you're referring to, or, you know, the scooter program, which is in the chat, right? Like, that's micro-mobility is one of the potential policy programs that we're thinking, you know, and I think that whenever I think about complete streets and roads that accommodate bikes and peds and other users, we at this point in time need to also be thinking about micro-mobility and making sure that whatever works for bikes also works with that, because that could be very transformational in terms of getting more people involved in out of their cars. So whether it's getting expanded or not, we can't say, because that kind of planning hasn't been done, but we're certainly considering the you know, the more ubiquitous use of those types of technologies into the future.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify another thing too that Mike has kind of touched on there, is that, you know, as we wrap up this study, you know, this is not going to necessarily, the study is not going to drive every solution, that even though we're looking at over 100 different alternatives and ideas, some of these go into others' jurisdictions. We've taken a very ambitious approach to look at mobility across modes and across jurisdictions, but some of these, as they get implemented, will be, you know, especially a lot of the local things will be down to the municipal level, which DOT may be helping with funding, or through the COG, or through programs, whether state or federal programs, to get money to implement them. But it's going to be more of kind of a menu of what we think is going to work. We are working with the various municipalities to try to coordinate and be on the same page with these ideas, to see that they all link up into a big puzzle of mobility in again, across all modes, and to support all people.
Yes, thank you so much, all of you, for this. I mean, it's first of all, to the question of Jim on the cargo bikes, as Casey put, there is a study which is done by CROG on a bike share feasibility, and which specifically look at e-bikes, but I don't think there is a focus on cargo at the time, or at least it was not as part of the discussion I had with CROG at the time.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. I missed the cargo part.
Cargo. Yeah. But I want to stress that something we've been pushing at Transport Effort is rebates on e-bikes, and we've been working with Deep on that, and we hope to have the program running by the fall, which will allow any resident in Connecticut to purchase an e-bike with a voucher directly from a back shop or online. It's not completely answering your question, but the other element on the scooters, that's a question for the city of Hartford. But anytime there's an update on the scooter program, which is done during the complete street meetings, which is every other month, it seems to be very successful. We see that numbers are up and up. So from the point of view of the vendor, it's very successful. It's a privately operated business, so it's really up to the company to expand it or not. Because they've been running it even in the winter and so on, which at first they were not planning to.
I have a couple other pieces, Thomas, I could add to that. So the whole reason that CROG study came about was because of its success in Hartford and a desire to make it more regional. And that study is working to identify what the barriers to spreading, whether it be scooters or e-bikes, just micro-mobility in general. And what tends to happen is one of the biggest barriers is simply administrative, the fact that it's a bunch of different towns that need to cooperate, and so that's why CROG is trying to take the lead. So yeah, no, I believe it's successful. I believe there is hope for it to expand, and we're trying to not redo or do the same planning things that other people are doing, which is why we've sort of taken a backseat to CROG's ongoing study. What I would encourage you to do is to provide comments to them about the desire for cargo bikes, part of that. Because to Thomas's point, a lot of these are, takes a lot of capitalism, right? These are private companies running these things and trying to make money. And what CROG's trying to do is to see if there's opportunities for kind of a joint management to it, regional management structure that kind of provides some more kind of consistency and oversight to a broader
question.
Michael, and just before Michael, I want to follow up just with Kevin on what you just said about working with those stakeholder and so on. And for us as advocates, it's where it is the most frustrating time is when there's a duty, there's municipalities, there's CROG, and federal funding as well, and we see that the municipalities don't always have the capacity to follow up on all the opportunity for fundings and all the project and so on. And here I'm really worried that municipalities don't take advantage of all the opportunities that they have at the moment with the federal infrastructure funding, which are means that some of them are already municipalities can apply now, and or don't even have the capacity and so on. So how does the DOT and with this, because I think Kevin, some of the projects that you're proposing do fit in some of the federal funding guideline and so on. So what's the plan here to convince municipalities to put some flex a little bit here on and to be aggressively applying for funding?
Well, I know that the COG has been definitely working with the municipalities, and when we've been working with them, we've really seen through most of them in the core that we're working with, really interested in a lot of the ideas that are coming out and looking for the help from us, and we are continuing to do so. And I'm hoping that they again, the best I can say is that we're continuing as the project team to help them along the way, to show them what the opportunities are. I know we've been doing a lot of work with Hartford and also a number of the neighboring communities, and and trying to see what their ideas are, and we've been incorporating them into the study. A little hard to say where it will go way down the line, but I do think that the COG is on top of it and trying to work with the communities too to take advantage of all these opportunities that are coming up right now.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience, Michael. Michael, you have a question now.
I think Kevin, it sounds like you just addressed my question, that the mobility study, let's see if I can phrase this right and with a question. There's general concerns, there's a general outlook for the region, whether it's, scooters, micro-mobility, complete streets, bike and ped best practice. At some point, I think if the study can cite specific opportunities without being too prescriptive,
Yeah.
That's something that I think whether it's Hartford and West Hartford or the whole region or whoever's going to benefit, when you point to some really specific opportunities in the existing situation, people can get really excited. And I guess where I'm going is to what extent can the study cite specific opportunities? And I've had the benefit of some brief communication with Kevin and Mike on this notion of the West Boulevard and potentially creating new links to Pope Park and these different neighborhoods. And I've had some conversations with Jules here. He's participating about the potential. I'm sure there's got to be a roster of these kinds of projects in Greater Hartford that I think the study could illuminate to create enthusiasm around some specific, again, not necessarily prescriptive, but specific notions about improving the relationship on the ground plane. I'll just add, the Park River is entombed where the Sisson Avenue ramps are. I mean, it's a very specific eyesore, a very difficult area over Capitol Avenue. I know it's been looked at. Is there a way, my question, is there a way that we can project that with greater specificity in the study? Or is that like further down the road? Is that a year or two down the road in terms of investigating some specific opportunities in that area?
I think it's going to be a combination because I think and I know it is frustrating, probably for many of the stakeholders that we are, sometimes staying a little bit more generic and broadly. But we're trying to avoid some, pitfalls of being, like you say, too prescriptive of things that, as we have to, our study is not going into full environmental study, and we have to make sure that we don't presuppose something if there are going to be certain impacts. But there will be some things that we will see that may not have such impacts, that we'll be able to say, hey, this is something that we are looking at. We've actually, the consultant team has kind of broken up a variety of these areas, and we have like an early action group that's looking at some of these things that may be able to be rolled out earlier, and we will start getting a little bit more specificity there. We're not really ready to discuss that right now, but we probably before the end of the study, there will be a group of things that we'll be able to see that could potentially advance out of this project sooner than later, and be much more focused on what they are.
Okay, so, and then lastly, quick question in addition, these aspirations about improving connections between 4 or 5 neighborhoods oriented to the west side, and even the riparian corridor for that matter, Mary, how can we get that in writing and submitted? Is it too late to do that? We can cite some of the opportunities in a communication. I know, there's been some informal communication, but we'd like to get something in the document. Is there another opportunity to submit something to you folks, to the consultant team?
Well, I think we're always listening. So, if you have anything, and I can't,
Mhm.
exactly say how it will be incorporated into the study, but we certainly are listening to everything that's coming in, and so I'd say go ahead and please do so.
Okay, well, we'll put a package together and something in writing and something with graphics. And thank you for taking my questions.
Sure thing.
I just added Hartford recently passed a resolution about the tributaries of the Park River, which include, of course, the North and South Branch, but basically most of the tributaries in the metro area, east of the Metacomet Ridge, to the Connecticut River. And it just clarifies the environmental value of the riparian corridors. It does mention a linear park. I think it's important to understand that linear parks are a great idea. It's really how, whether they're divided or whether the recreation or the pathways theorem is just like, it's whether they're really a functional ecosystem, I think is what I'm trying to get at, as a linear park or as a greenway, or whether it's just an excuse for a sidewalk that has more trees around it. But so that's in the web that has been approved by City Council, signed and certified by the mayor in the past month or two. And what else? I did also mention in the chat, I must say I'm not from Connecticut, I'm from Kansas City, and Kansas City is notoriously, car dependent. But one of the original development characteristics of the city is these neighborhood hubs that were generated by J.C. Nichols, and they create a walkable neighborhood within a city that's now it's a very large metro area. I think it rivals LA for sprawl, but it does make the neighborhoods very livable. I go further out south in the newer developments that don't adhere to the older principles. And I think that there's a loss that was just simply the J.C. Nichols company understood and worked with the city and with George Kessler, who was brought to Kansas City by Frederick Law Olmsted, and laid out the Parks and Boulevard system. So anyway, I hope you take that idea of really focusing on the clusters, because I see Connecticut as having developed businesses along drives along, the Silestein Highway, the Berlin Turnpike, Farmington Avenue at the smaller scale. And I think the quality of life would be so much stronger if you would recognize economic hubs and then develop quality passages in between those clusters.
Yeah. Thank you, Mary.
I think we had something from Cindy.
Then Cindy, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. I'm relatively new to this and excited to be joining. And just happy to see the priorities thus far of this the study being multimodal, bikes, and pedestrian safety, and so on. So we in Wethersfield, I'm from Wethersfield, live here for many years, and we have a great interest in improving the Silestein Highway and its multimodal capacity. It's a highway that hasn't really been improved except widened in 70 years. And we really need your support. And we hope that you'll, we know there are a number of ways to achieve this in terms of the actual design, but we hope that you'll make this a priority. There's just it's just so important to our town in terms of economic development, in terms of quality of life. Pedestrian safety it's just very, very difficult and dangerous for pedestrians, which include school children, to travel across this road. So I just hope that it will be, Silas Dean will be one of those priorities. And we'll be happy to work with you. I know that there's interest at both the town level and our town manager, our Economic Development Committee, and volunteers in the community. I want to make one other point, because you mentioned Kansas City. And I want to just say, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska a year ago. I know you've reviewed a lot of studies. I was really astounded. They have 250 miles of trails and linear paths in this city. And you can get to anywhere with a bike, on a pretty much bike path. And it's just, if you've looked at that and what they've done, how they did it, I don't know, the layout, what had to happen, but it was, I was astonished. Very bike friendly and pedestrian friendly.
Thank you. And I share your thoughts on the Silas Dean Highway as a former Weathersfield resident who frequently dealt with a lot of those issues as well.
And the town has been very, has done good coordination with us and speaking to that issue as well.
Yeah, and so we're just looking for, expertise when we can find it, and of course, funding. So we don't, when we think about it in our town, there's just, in terms of the actual design, the renderings of the highway itself, we're, and that's of course, the matter of state government as well, because it's a state highway. So it's a very complicated and multi-layered process, and but we want to get started on it, and we're very anxious to get this underway.
Yeah, and on this, if I can add, a question to Mike, Casey, and Kevin, is that, what timeline are you for, to deliver your proposals under the? I'm just worried here that we already have deadlines coming out for federal funding, and so we don't want to miss them. If some of the projects that you have can match this funding opportunities, which are once in a lifetime.
We're already working on pursuing federal funding. We've done a bunch of homework to identify all the different discretionary grant programs that are outlined in the new bill, and are actively kind of engaging and monitoring the schedule for the different programs as they come out. So we are working to ensure that we are not missing any.
No, my question is when are you going to deliver your?
Oh, the study is aiming to publish a final report by the end of the year.
By the end of the year. Okay, great. Thank you. We have 5 minutes to go. Any last question? Jules.
Hi. Excuse me. Yeah, just wanted to weigh in kind of quickly, hopefully. I'm really happy to see the direction everything's taken. I think in the beginning with the giant pile of alternatives, things looked a little dicey to me in terms of what direction things could go. But right now, I'm really happy with the priorities and everything laid out here and so forth. One thing that particularly interests me is the Prague's rapid route study, which I think is really important. And in terms of the good old-fashioned narrow mobility kind of focus that these things kind of have, I think there's an enormous opportunity there in terms of the literal problem of just moving people around. And so I was curious of what the state of that is. And in fact, apologies to the people in Weathersfield, but I had not heard about this Silas Dean idea, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. But it seems like that there's actually could be some synergy there in terms of it becoming, like in terms of talking about transit urban development and so forth on the Silas Dean, that implies some transit, and having the Silas Dean as a leg of you know, of a, you know, traffic prioritized, traffic separated bus system, I think would be, you know, staggering potential there. So I just wanted to say that, and yeah, thanks.
So the state is, I believe they have a draft final plan that's published and out for public comment, maybe through the end of July. So that's, I'll put a link to their website. So that's, and you know, that study, you know, was really focused on nearer term ideas, you know, as opposed to something that Silas Dean that might take quite significant investment and work to generate. So I think there's a real synergy between kind of building off some of those priority corridors and kind of building an even more ambitious and holistic network. Let me put the link. Yeah, so I believe it's open for it says through June 15th, but I remember hearing that may have gotten pushed out, but I'll put a link to that right here.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any last question or comment? No. Well, thank you so much, everybody from FHI and Casey and Kevin for joining us today, and everybody for participating in this conversation. It's going to be uploaded on our YouTube channel, and maybe before or when you release your report, we can have another conversation by the end of the year. Great, thank you so much, everybody, and wishing you a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for setting this up.
Thank you.